I'm Judy Brewster, and I was 33 the night my parents decided I wasn't worth the drive. Black ice on Route 15. That's all it took. 1 second I was humming along to the radio on my way home for Thanksgiving, headlights cutting through sleet, and the next second my Camry struck the guardrail at 52 miles an hour and folded around me like a crushed tin can. 4 broken ribs, a lacerated spleen, internal bleeding severe enough that the trauma surgeon kept me open for 6 hours while I hovered somewhere between alive and not. When I woke up, the recovery room was empty. No flowers on the nightstand. No jacket draped over the chair. Just fluorescent light, a heart monitor keeping its indifferent rhythm, and a whiteboard where someone had written, "Family notified. Decline to come." The charge nurse told me later, gently, the way you tell someone their dog didn't make it, that she'd called my mother at 6 a.m. My mother's response, a single sentence I will carry in my chest far longer than the scars, will come if she dies. But here's what none of them knew. Not my mother. Not my father. Not my sister, who was too occupied basting a turkey to pick up the phone. There was a man in a black wool jacket who walked into that hospital, paid my entire bill in cash, and left a cedar box wrapped in brown paper at the nurse's station with one instruction: don't open it until you get home. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk away with their dignity intact. If you've ever given everything to people who gave nothing back, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I'd just come off a double shift in the pediatric ICU at St. Anne's. 12 hours monitoring a 4-year-old on a ventilator, then 12 more covering for a colleague who called in sick. My neck ached. My scrub smelled of antiseptic and the vending machine coffee I'd spilled on myself at 3 a.m. But I packed my overnight bag anyway, because I had promised my mother I'd make the drive to Dunmore for the holiday. 3 hours on Route 15 through the Alleghenies. I'd done it dozens of times. The sleet started near Lewisburg. I dropped my speed to 40, then 35. The wipers slapped steadily. The road turned silver. And then nothing. No warning. The rear tires broke loose on a patch of black ice, and the car swung sideways into the guardrail with a sound like someone crumpling a sheet of tin foil the size of a building. I remember the airbag hitting my face. I remember a rib snapping, a deep, wet pop I felt more than heard. After that, just cold air rushing in through the shattered window, and the taste of copper on my tongue. The paramedics told me later I was conscious when they cut me out, but I have no memory of it. I woke up 20 hours later in a bed at Geisinger. A drainage tube in my side, and 4 in each arm. A pain in my rib cage so sharp that every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. I turned my head toward the chair beside the bed. Empty. I checked my phone on the tray table. No missed calls. No texts. Just a lock screen photo of me and my mother from 2 Christmases ago, both of us smiling like we meant it. The charge nurse, a woman named Dana with reading glasses on a beaded chain, came in around noon to check my vitals. She adjusted the morphine drip, scanned the chart, and then sat on the edge of the bed, the way nurses do when what they're about to say isn't medical. "Your family knows you're here," she said. "I called the number in your emergency contacts at 6 this morning." I waited. Dana looked at the chart again, then at me. "Your mother said they were hosting Thanksgiving dinner. She said they'd come if things got worse." She chose her words carefully. But I had been a nurse for 9 years. I could hear the redaction. "What exactly did she say, Dana?" Dana exhaled. "Will come if she dies." The sentence landed like a second crash. I replayed it later in the dark, because replaying was easier than feeling. The trauma surgeon, Dr. Okafor, had documented it in my chart under the family contact section. Family notified 0605. Declined to attend. Patient stable post-op. That was me. Stable post-op. Not worth a 3-hour drive on a holiday when there was a turkey in the oven and guests arriving at noon. I stared at the ceiling and did what I'd always done. I calculated. My mother had a 24-seat dining table she'd purchased on credit the year my sister Megan got engaged. Megan's fiancé's parents were coming. Megan's college friends. Megan's coworker who always brought the good wine. There was no place at that table for a daughter with a drainage tube and a morphine drip. There never truly had been. The next question surfaced slowly. The way fog rolls in off a river. If my family didn't pay the hospital bill, who did? I should tell you who I am, because it matters for what comes next. I'm a pediatric ICU nurse at St. Anne's Children's Hospital in Harrisburg. I hold other people's children when they code. I walk parents through the worst nights of their lives while their toddler lies on a ventilator and the monitors are screaming and the attending still hasn't come out of the OR. I've done that for 9 years. I am very, very good at remaining calm. I am also very good at being the one who stays behind. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. I volunteered for every holiday shift because somebody had to. And my family never complained when I couldn't make it. They never complained because they preferred it. Megan was the daughter who arrived with flowers and a casserole and the right shade of lipstick. I was the daughter who showed up with dark circles, scrub lint in her hair, and a phone that buzzed during grace. My mother once introduced me to a neighbor as our other one. She works with sick kids. Bless her heart. If you've spent any time in small-town Pennsylvania, you know that phrase is not a blessing. Somewhere in my 20s, I stopped expecting the front row seat. I stopped expecting the birthday call that came before 10 in the morning. I stopped expecting my mother to ask how my shift went. I didn't resent it exactly. I just recalibrated. I am a PICU nurse. Recalibrating is what I do. You assess the vitals. You accept the data. You adjust the plan. The data said, you are not the priority. So I adjusted. I worked holidays. I covered doubles. I built a life that didn't require their approval. And I told myself that was enough. It almost was. On my second day in the hospital, a patient services clerk named Lorraine knocked on my door. She was perhaps 55, silver hair pinned neatly back, reading glasses perched on her nose, carrying a clipboard in one hand and a small rectangular package in the other. The package was wrapped in brown craft paper and tied with white kitchen string, the kind of wrapping that belonged on a care package from 1962, not a modern trauma ward. Miss Brewster. She stepped inside and set the package on my tray table. A gentleman dropped this off for you yesterday evening. Tall, older, black wool jacket. She glanced at her clipboard. He also settled your account. I blinked. My account? Your hospital bill. Surgery, anesthesia, the room, all of it. Paid in full. She said it the way someone might announce that a neighbor had shoveled your walk. Matter of fact. Routine. But there was nothing routine about a stranger walking into a hospital and paying a bill that had to exceed $80,000. He left a message, Lorraine added. He said, and I wrote it down because it seemed important, tell her not to open it until she gets home. I stared at the package. It was the size of a shoebox and heavier than it looked. When I lifted it, the paper crinkled softly, and underneath I caught a faint scent drifting upward. Cedar. Like the inside of a hope chest. Like my grandfather's workshop, which I hadn't thought about in years. Did he leave a name? Lorraine shook her head. Just the jacket and the instructions. She left. I held the box for a long time, running my thumb along the string. My ribs ached with every shift, and the cedar smell kept rising like a question I wasn't yet ready to answer. They discharged me on Friday afternoon, 2 days after the crash, 1 day after Thanksgiving. Nobody from my family came to collect me. My coworker Renata drove 45 minutes from Harrisburg in her Subaru with the heated seats and the bumper sticker that said, "Nurses do it with gloves on." She brought me a turkey sandwich from Moa and didn't ask a single question about why my mother wasn't there. That's the thing about ICU nurses. We know when not to ask. My apartment was cold when we arrived. I'd left in a rush Wednesday night and forgotten to turn the heat up. Renata helped me inside, adjusted my sling, set my discharge medications on the counter, and microwaved a mug of broth because I couldn't lift my arm high enough to reach the buttons. Every time I laughed at one of her jokes, my ribs punished me, a hot grinding ache that radiated from my left side all the way into my shoulder blade, sharper now than it had been in the hospital, because I'd cut my morphine dose in half out of habit. The cedar box sat on my kitchen counter where Renata had placed it. She'd carried it in from the car without a word. It looked wrong there, between the toaster and the fruit bowl, too solemn for a Formica countertop. "You going to open that?" Renata asked, pulling on her coat. I shook my head. Not yet. She didn't push. She just hugged me carefully, The way you embrace someone whose ribs are held together with surgical wire, and left. The apartment settled into silence. I sat at the table with my broth and stared at the box and thought about the number on my hospital bill. $82,400. Somebody had written a check for that. Somebody in a black jacket who smelled like cedar. Saturday morning. The phone rang for the first time since the crash. Not a text, not a notification, an actual call. I didn't recognize the number. A 570 area code. Scranton. Miss Brewster. My name is Daniel Frost. I'm an estate attorney with Frost and Associates in Dunmore. I sat up too quickly. My ribs reminded me not to do that. I'm calling about your grandfather. Walter Brewster. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. 16 years, to be precise. Walter Brewster. My father's father. The man my mother had cut out of our lives when I was 17. The year I started applying to nursing programs. The year my grandfather stopped appearing at holidays, stopped calling, stopped existing in our family's vocabulary as anything other than a cautionary tale my mother recited at dinner parties. Your grandfather passed away, Frost said. 3 weeks ago. Quietly at home. Per his instructions, I'm reaching out to you now. 3 weeks. My grandfather had been gone for 3 weeks, and no one had told me. Not my father, whose father he was. Not my mother, who apparently had the time to arrange a 24-seat Thanksgiving dinner, but not 30 seconds to pick up the phone and say, your grandfather is gone. Mr. Frost, I said. I haven't spoken to my grandfather since I was 17. I'm aware of that, he said. He was too. A brief pause. He was also aware that you would be the last to know. Then he asked me to mention the box. The cedar box was still on my kitchen counter, untouched, the string still tied. I'd like to meet with you in person, Miss Brewster. There are documents you'll need to review, and a few things your grandfather wanted you to understand before anyone else contacts you about his estate. Anyone else. He met my parents. I met Daniel Frost the following Tuesday at his office on Main Street in Dunmore, a narrow brick building with a brass nameplate and a waiting room that smelled of aged leather and lemon furniture polish. Frost was in his late 60s, lean and precise. With silver hair combed straight back and reading glasses, he kept folding and unfolding as he spoke. He wore a black wool jacket. The same jacket Lorraine had described. I've been your grandfather's attorney for 23 years, he said, settling behind his desk. I drafted his will. I managed his trust. And for the last 16 years, I've been the person he spoke to most about you. I set the cedar box on the desk between us. Still wrapped, still tied. Frost looked at it the way you look at a letter you've been waiting a very long time to deliver. You were the first person I called after Walter died, he said. Not your father. You. That was Walter's instruction. Written and notarized. He opened a manila folder. Your grandfather established a revocable trust in 2011. He funded it with the proceeds from the sale of his machine shop, his savings, and a rental property in Scranton. The trust names one beneficiary. He slid a single page across the desk. My name was typed in the center in plain 12-point font. Judith N. Brewster. Sole beneficiary. The man in the black jacket, I said. Frost almost smiled. Walter asked me to go in person. He didn't want you waking up alone with nothing but a bill and a whiteboard. My chest tightened. Not the ribs this time. Something deeper. My grandfather, the man I hadn't seen since I was 17, had made sure that when I woke up broken and alone in a hospital room, someone would be there. Not my parents. Him. The last time I saw my grandfather, I was 17 and he was 63. It was a Sunday in October. He'd driven down from Dunmore in his old Ford pickup, the one with the bench seat and the AM radio that only pulled in 2 stations, to watch me play field hockey. A JV game that mattered to no one except him. After the game, he took me to a diner and ordered us both grilled cheese and tomato soup. And while we ate, he asked about my classes, my college list, and whether I'd thought any more about nursing school. He listened the way he always listened, leaning forward slightly, one hand wrapped around his coffee mug, not checking his watch, not glancing at the television above the counter. My grandfather was a machinist. He'd run a small shop in Scranton for 40 years, shaping and turning metal into components for mining equipment. His hands were scarred, and his hearing had been worn down by decades of lathe noise. But when he talked to me, he was the quietest, most present person in any room. "Wherever you land, kiddo," he said that day, wiping soup from his chin with a paper napkin, "I'll know how to find you." I didn't understand what he meant. I assumed it was simply the kind of thing grandfathers say. 3 weeks later, my mother told us Walter was no longer welcome in our home. She said he'd been difficult. She said he'd been interfering. She said it was for the best. My father stood at the kitchen counter and said nothing. And just like that, Walter Brewster vanished from my life. No goodbye. No explanation that held together under scrutiny. Just a closed door and a silence that endured 16 years, until a man in a black jacket walked into a hospital and paid my bill. If you're still with me, thank you. I thought about stopping this story a dozen times, because parts of it still make my hands tremble. But I think someone listening right now has their own cedar box. Maybe not a literal one, but something you've been afraid to open. Something left by someone you lost before you were ready. If that's you, hit subscribe and stay with me, because the part that changed everything is still ahead. I sat with the box on Frost's desk for a long time. I ran my thumb over the string the way I'd done every evening since the hospital. Frost waited. He didn't rush. He had been waiting 16 years for this moment, and he seemed entirely content to wait a few minutes more. Before I opened the box, I called my mother. I sat in Frost's parking lot with the engine running, my ribs pressing against the seatbelt, and dialed the number I knew by heart. She picked up on the fourth ring. Judy. Not sweetie. Not honey. Just my name flat, like a label on a filing folder. "Hi, Mom. I'm out of the hospital. I heard." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the surgery, the ribs, or the drainage tube they'd removed the day before. "Mom, Grandpa Walter died." A pause, then, "I know. 3 weeks ago." "Yes." "Nobody told me." "Judy, you don't understand what that man put this family through. He was difficult. He made your father's life miserable. We made a decision 16 years ago, and it was the right one." Her voice carried that clipped, rehearsed quality, the tone she used when the neighbors asked why Walter never came to Christmas anymore. I pressed the phone harder against my ear and felt my ribs flare. A sharp spike of pain running from my sternum to my spine, as though my body was trying to confirm what my mind already understood. "Mom, why did you really cut him off?" The actual reason. Silence. Then, quieter. "Don't go digging, Judy. Some things are better left alone. Like me in a hospital room." She hung up. I sat there with the phone dark in my lap, breathing through the rib pain, and turned that line over slowly. Don't go digging. In my 9 years as a nurse, whenever a patient's family says don't ask questions, there is always something in the chart they don't want you to read. I called Aunt Pam that same afternoon. Pam was my father's younger sister, the one who still mailed me a birthday card every year with a folded 20 tucked inside. The one who always seemed vaguely uncomfortable at family gatherings, as though she were sitting on a secret she'd been asked to keep indefinitely. "Pam, what really happened with Grandpa Walter?" She didn't answer immediately. I heard a kitchen timer sound in the background, a chair scraping against tile. "Your mother happened," Pam said finally. "Judy, your grandfather confronted Carol about the difference, about how things were between you and Megan. He did it at Thanksgiving 16 years ago, in front of the entire table. He said it wasn't right. The way your mother treated you. He called it exactly what it was. What did Mom do? What she always does. She rewrote the story." Pam's voice dropped. "Within a month, Carol had told everyone, the neighbors, the church group, your father's co-workers, that Walter was losing his mind. That he'd become controlling. That he'd made threats. None of it was true, Judy. I was there. He didn't raise his voice once. He simply stated a fact your mother couldn't tolerate hearing." I pressed my hand gently against my ribs and breathed. "Did anyone push back?" "I tried. Your father told me to stay out of it." "And Walter?" She paused, and I heard something careful in her voice, something she had been holding for a long time. "Walter just went quiet. He stopped calling. He stopped showing up. But Judy," another pause. "He kept things. Letters, cards, things Carol sent back. He kept all of it. I always wondered if someone would eventually need to see them. Seed planted. Roots spreading. I drove back to Frost's office the next morning and opened the box. My hands trembled when I untied the string. The paper fell away, and underneath was a wooden box, cedar, unfinished, with a hinged lid my grandfather had clearly built himself. I could see the dovetail joints, the sanding marks, the faint pencil line where he had measured twice before cutting. Inside, the box was lined with felt. On top, a sealed envelope with my name in my grandfather's handwriting, blocky capital letters, the penmanship of a man who had worked with his hands his entire life. Below the envelope, 16 smaller envelopes, each dated on the outside. One for every year since the cutoff. 2008, 2009, 2010, all the way to 2024. I picked up the first one. It had been opened, then resealed with tape. "Those are letters he wrote you every year," Frost said from across the desk. "He mailed the first 3. Your mother returned them unopened. After that, he kept writing but stopped sending them. He said he didn't want to give Carol the satisfaction of returning them." Below the letters, a slim manila folder. I opened it and found a tuition disbursement record from my nursing school. A scholarship I'd received my sophomore year, the Keystone Healthcare Workers Grant, had been funded by a private trust. Walter's Trust. He had quietly paid for 2 years of my education through a grant I believed had come from the university. And at the very bottom of the box, tucked beneath the folder, a photograph. It was taken at my nursing school graduation 9 years ago. The auditorium, the stage, the rows of folding chairs. And in the last row, standing near the exit, an old man in a black wool jacket, hands clasped in front of him, watching. My grandfather. He had been there. I opened the sealed envelope on top. One line in those same blocky capitals. "You were never alone, kiddo." I sat in Frost's office for 2 hours reading those letters. 16 years of a one-sided conversation with a granddaughter who never wrote back because she hadn't known the conversation existed. The early ones were brief, shop updates, a joke about his neighbor's dog, a line about the weather in Dunmore. But by 2012, the letters had changed entirely. He had begun tracking my life with quiet, methodical care. Judy graduated from St. Anne's nursing program. May 14, 2015. Judy was promoted to charge nurse in the PICU, the youngest in the department. Judy moved to a new apartment on Walnut Street, the building with the blue awning. He knew my graduation date. He knew my promotion. He knew my address. Not because he had been watching from the shadows. Frost explained that Walter had subscribed to the St. Anne's Hospital newsletter, which published staff announcements, and had asked Frost to check public records for address changes once a year. Simple, entirely legal. The kind of quiet, methodical attention a machinist would engineer. No drama. No confrontation. Just careful, patient tracking of the data. The tuition records confirmed what Frost had already hinted at. Walter had funded the Keystone Healthcare Workers Grant through his trust, a $10,000 disbursement each semester for 4 semesters. I had written a thank you letter to the grant committee my sophomore year. Frost had a copy of it in his files. My grandfather had read it and kept it. $40,000 over 2 years, paid without a word, without credit, without a single signature I would have recognized. I set the letters down and looked at Frost. Why didn't he just reach out to me directly? He tried. Your mother returned the letters. After that, Walter decided the worst thing he could do was force you to choose between him and your parents while you were still a teenager. He chose to wait. The 6th letter, dated 2013, 5 years into the silence, was the one that explained everything. Walter had written it on the anniversary of the Thanksgiving when it all came apart. I shouldn't have done it at the table. That was my error. But I'd watched Carol seat Judy at the far end with the younger cousins for 2 years running while Megan sat at the head beside her. I'd watched Carol introduce Megan to visitors as my daughter and Judy as our other one. I'd watched Judy bring a pie she'd baked from scratch, and Carol set it on the counter behind the store-bought one without a word. The letter described what followed in plain, mechanical detail, the way a machinist documents a fault in a machine. Walter had set his fork down, looked at Carol, and asked quietly, "Why does Judy eat with the children?" Carol's face went pale. Gary stared at his plate. Megan reached for the wine. And Carol said, in front of the entire table, "Because Judy doesn't mind." That was the line. 16 years of silence grew from that single moment. Not because Walter had been cruel. Not because he had threatened anyone. But because he had named the thing Carol had spent years carefully pretending didn't exist, and he had named it in front of witnesses. Your mother couldn't tolerate being seen, Frost said quietly. So she made certain no one would ever listen to Walter again. Within weeks, Carol had contacted every relative, every neighbor, every member of the church auxiliary. Walter was senile. Walter was controlling. Walter had made threats. By Christmas, Gary had changed the locks and stopped returning his father's calls. Walter spent the next 16 years alone in his house in Dunmore, 3 hours from his granddaughter, writing letters to a girl who believed he had simply walked away. Frost opened a second folder, thicker, older, with a blue cover. This is the standing instruction file, he said. Walter drafted the first version in 2012. We updated it every 2 years. The standing instruction was precisely what it sounded like. Walter had written a set of documented, notarized directives granting Frost legal authority to act on my behalf in the event of a medical emergency, a financial crisis, or a civil legal threat. The trigger conditions were specific: hospitalization exceeding 24 hours, a bankruptcy filing, or a civil judgment over $10,000. If any of those conditions were met, Frost was authorized to liquidate trust assets to cover the costs, deliver the cedar box in person, and make contact. He never wanted to intrude, Frost said. He told me more than once that the worst part of Carol's campaign was that it worked. You grew up believing he was the one who left. He believed that if he showed up uninvited, it would only confirm that story. I stared at the folder. How did he know about the crash? I maintain a standing alert on your name through a legal monitoring service, Frost said. Standard practice for estate attorneys managing contingent beneficiaries. Your name appeared in a Pennsylvania State Police accident report Wednesday evening. I verified the hospital by Thursday morning and drove down Thursday afternoon. Thanksgiving Day. While my mother was carving a turkey and my sister was pouring wine for 24 guests, a 67-year-old attorney in a black wool jacket was driving 3 hours through sleet to pay my hospital bill and deliver a dead man's box to a woman he had never met. I picked up the graduation photograph. My grandfather standing in the last row watching. He saw me, I whispered. Frost nodded. Every milestone he could locate, he was always there. It happened on a Thursday, 9 days after the crash. I was home, ribs still wrapped, sorting through the last of Walter's letters at my kitchen table when my phone lit up like a hospital switchboard. 3 missed calls from my mother in 12 minutes. 2 from my father, the first time he had called me directly in over a year. 1 from Megan. And a text from Carol that read, "We need to talk about Dad's estate. Call me immediately." Not Grandpa. Not Walter. Dad's estate. My father's father had been dead for a month, and my mother hadn't mentioned him once. Not to me, not at Thanksgiving, not during the single cold phone call after my surgery. Now, suddenly, he was Dad again. I set the phone on the table, screen up, and watched the notifications accumulate. Carol, Judy, pick up the phone. Carol, this is important. Megan, hey, Mom says there's something about Grandpa's stuff. Can you call her? Gary, Judy, please call your mother. For people who hadn't called when I was bleeding on a highway shoulder. For people who hadn't called when I was in surgery for 6 hours. For people who hadn't called when I woke up alone facing a whiteboard that read "Decline to come." Now they were flooding my phone because there was money on the table. I listened to the last voicemail. Carol's voice. And this was the part that made my ribs ache harder than the crash itself. It was warm. Tender. A voice I hadn't heard since I was 12 years old. The voice she used when she still thought I might turn out like Megan. Sweetheart, we've been so worried about you. I'm so sorry we couldn't make it to the hospital. Megan's dinner was already planned and we just couldn't reschedule. But we want to make it right. Come home. We're family. I deleted the voicemail. I didn't call back for 3 days. I needed that time, not to plan revenge. I want to be clear about that. I am not a person who constructs traps. I am a PICU nurse. I troubleshoot. I identify the problem, gather the data, and implement a solution that protects the patient. The patient in this case was me. On Monday, I called Frost. My mother wants me to come to a family dinner, I said. She's framing it as a reconciliation, but she mentioned the estate in her very first text. I expected that, Frost said. He sounded weary, the way people sound when they've watched the same slow collision for 16 years. The trust is airtight, Judy. Revocable became irrevocable at Walter's death. You're the sole beneficiary. There is no legal mechanism for your parents to contest it. They were deliberately excluded with a no-contest clause, and the trust was funded years before Walter died. There's no basis for an undue influence claim. I want you there, I said. At the dinner? Frost paused. Why? Because my mother has spent 16 years telling a story about a man who couldn't defend himself. Now he can. Not with shouting. Not with a lawsuit. Just with the letters he kept and the truth he documented. I heard Frost turning something over quietly. Walter would have disliked a scene, he said. But he kept those letters for a reason. And he kept the cards your mother returned. And he kept the church group email where Carol told the congregation he'd been institutionalized, which was a lie. I hadn't known about the email. I'll be there, Frost said. Dinner is Saturday, I told him. My mother's house. Extended family. She'll have an audience. So will you. I spent the week preparing the way I prepare for a code blue, methodically, without emotion, checking every line and every lead. Frost couriered over copies of the key documents, the trust instrument naming me as sole beneficiary, the tuition disbursement records from the Keystone Grant, and the return mail log. A spreadsheet Walter had maintained for 16 years, listing every letter, birthday card, and Christmas gift he had sent that came back marked return to sender in Carol's handwriting. There were 47 entries. 47 letters and packages my grandfather had sent me that my mother had intercepted and returned without ever once mentioning they existed. I also requested a copy of my medical chart from Geisinger, specifically the family contact note from the night of the crash. Dr. Okafor's handwriting was small and precise. Family notified 0605. Mother stated, "We will come if she dies. Declined to attend. Patient stable post-op." I made 3 copies. One went in my bag, one in my filing cabinet, and one in a sealed envelope I left with Renata, because PICU nurses always maintain a backup plan for the backup plan. I didn't rehearse a speech. I didn't draft talking points. I didn't allow myself to imagine watching my mother's expression collapse. I simply organized the evidence the way I'd organize a patient file, chronological, documented, and clear enough that anyone reviewing it would arrive at the same conclusion. My grandfather had loved me quietly for 16 years while my mother had erased him loudly. The documents made that fact inarguable. On Friday night, I ironed a blouse, took 3 ibuprofen for my ribs, and went to bed early. I slept better than I had in weeks. There is a particular kind of calm that comes from knowing precisely what you are going to say and precisely when you are going to say it. Megan called Saturday morning, 5 hours before the dinner. I was at my kitchen table with coffee, the cedar box open beside me, Walter's letters stacked in chronological order. "Judy, I want to talk before tonight." Her voice had that bright, carefully managed quality, the voice of a woman who had been coached. "Look, I know things have been complicated, but Grandpa would have wanted us to stay together. He was a family man, and whatever he left behind, it should remain in the family. That's just common sense. Common sense." My sister, who had not called from the hospital, who had not sent a single text during my surgery, who had hosted a 24-person Thanksgiving dinner while I was waking up alone with a tube in my side, she was now invoking common sense and family values to suggest I hand over a dead man's legacy. "Megan, did you know Grandpa died? Mom mentioned it about 3 weeks before your crash. Did you think about telling me?" Silence. Mom said it wasn't the right time. The right time for what? "Judy, don't make this harder than it has to be. We raised you. Mom and Dad sacrificed. Mom said she'd come if I died." It came out quietly. Not with anger, just factual. The way I'd stayed a blood pressure reading. I heard Megan's breath catch. She didn't mean it like that. How did she mean it, Megan? Another silence, longer this time. I could hear her swallowing. "Just come tonight," she said finally. "We can work this out as a family." "I'll be there," I said. And I meant it, just not the way she thought. My father called an hour after Megan. This surprised me. Gary Brewster was not a man who made phone calls. He was the man who stood at the back of family photographs with his hands in his pockets and a half-smile that never reached his eyes. A man who allowed his wife to do the talking, the planning, the deciding. A man who had permitted his wife to erase his own father from his life and had spent 16 years persuading himself it had been the right call. Judy. His voice was different from Carol's and Megan's. Thinner, stripped of rehearsal. Your mother's planning a nice dinner tonight. She wants to, reconnect. I know what she wants, Dad. A pause. I could hear a television murmuring in the background. A football pregame, maybe. Gary in his recliner. I should have called the hospital, he said. The sentence came out like he'd been rehearsing it for days and still couldn't deliver it right. When Dana called, the nurse, I should have gotten in the car. I know that. I didn't say anything. I let the silence hold its ground. Your grandfather, he said and then stopped. I heard him clear his throat. He was a good man, Judy. He was difficult sometimes, but he was a good man, and I should have. His voice fractured, just for a second. A hairline crack in the wall he'd spent 16 years reinforcing. Then Carol's voice in the background. Gary, who are you talking to? And just like that, the crack sealed shut. Just come tonight, he said. Quieter now. Think about your mother. Think about your mother. Not think about what's right. Not I'm sorry I let you wake up alone. Not I miss my father. Think about your mother. I'll be there, Dad. I hung up. After Gary's call, I sat with Walter's last letter, the one dated 3 months before his death, and read it for the 4th time. He'd written it in a shakier hand than the earlier ones, the capitals slightly uneven, the pen pressing harder on the downstrokes. Kiddo, he wrote. I'm 79 and the doctor says my heart is slowing down. I'm not scared. I built things my whole life, machines, parts, joints that held under pressure. The one thing I built that I'm proudest of is you. Even though you don't know it yet. This money isn't a prize. It's a foundation. I didn't save it so you could buy a house or retire early. I saved it so you could do the thing you were always going to do anyway. Take care of people without ever having to wonder if anybody was taking care of you. Use it however you want. But if you're looking for a suggestion, find the kids who don't have somebody in the last row. Be that last row. I set the letter down. I knew what I was going to do with the estate before I finished reading. Not because Walter had instructed me to, but because he had described the exact shape of the hollow I'd carried my entire life, and he had handed me away to fill it for someone else. The Walter Brewster Fund. Scholarships for first-generation nursing students. Kids who earned their place in the program on merit alone but had no family cheering from the front row. Kids like me 20 years ago, who believed a mysterious grant was simply good fortune and never once imagined it was love in disguise. I folded the letter and placed it back in the box. Tonight, I would walk into my mother's house carrying nothing but a bag of documents and the truth. That was enough. It had always been enough. The drive to Dunmore was 3 hours. Same road. Same mountains. The same stretch of Route 15 where my Camry had struck the guardrail 2 weeks earlier. The rental, a gray Nissan that smelled of air freshener and someone else's regret, handled cleanly. The roads were dry. The sky was overcast but clear. My ribs ached with a low, steady pulse, nothing like the shattered glass sensation from the hospital. More like a deep bruise now, a reminder that was gradually losing its edge, the way pain does when you stop bracing against it and learn to breathe through it instead. I drove past the accident site without stopping. There was a fresh scar on the guardrail, a silver scrape against old rust where my car had crumpled, but someone had already placed a reflector cone beside it and the world had moved on. I thought about Walter making this same drive year after year, alone in his Ford pickup, 3 hours each way, just to stand at the back of an auditorium or a stadium or a church parking lot and watch from a distance. Never approaching, never demanding acknowledgement, simply being present. Quietly, the way a foundation supports a building without anyone noticing it's there. You were never alone, kiddo. His handwriting blurred in front of my eyes, and I had to pull over at a rest stop near Williamsport to wipe my face, drink some water, and let my ribs stop throbbing. I was not going to walk into my mother's house with red eyes. I was going to walk in the way I walk into a code blue, calm, prepared, and entirely clear about what needed to happen next. At 5:47 p.m., I pulled into my parents' driveway. 8 cars. A full house. Carol had invited the entire family. I picked up my bag, checked the documents one final time, and stepped out of the car. My mother answered the door in a cream-colored sweater and pearl earrings, her hair freshly set, her smile wide enough to sell real estate. "Judy, oh, sweetheart, come in." She pulled me into a hug, carefully, because even Carol Brewster knew better than to squeeze a woman with broken ribs. Over her shoulder, I could see the dining room. The 24-seat table was set for 12 tonight. White linen, the good china, a centerpiece of autumn leaves and small decorative pumpkins that Megan had likely found on Pinterest. Aunt Pam was in the kitchen drying a serving dish. She caught my eye and gave me a small, deliberate nod, the kind that said, "I know exactly why you're here." 2 of my cousins, Tyler and Bridget, were on the couch with their phones. Megan was pouring wine at the sideboard. Her fiancé Derek was making pleasant conversation with my father, who stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man who wished he were somewhere else entirely. Frost was not yet there. He had told me he'd arrive at 6:15, 15 minutes after me. Enough time for Carol to settle comfortably into her performance before the curtain went up. "You look thin," Carol said, steering me toward the living room. "We need to get some food into you." Megan made her butternut soup. Her hand was on my elbow, guiding me the way she had always guided me, toward the seat she had chosen, at the end of the table she had arranged, in the version of the family she had scripted. "Actually, Mom," I said, "I'd like to wait until everyone's seated." She blinked. "Of course, sweetheart." Still smiling. She had no idea what was in my bag. No idea that Frost was 12 minutes away. No idea that the woman standing in her foyer was not the same Judy who had driven home for Thanksgiving 2 weeks ago. We sat down at 6:10. Carol had placed me between Megan and Aunt Pam, a deliberate arrangement, I realized, designed to keep me flanked by presumed family loyalty. The butternut soup was served. Grace was said, by Carol, who thanked God for bringing her family back together the way it should be. Megan squeezed my arm. Derek complimented the table setting. My father said nothing. The doorbell rang at 6:15. I stood up. "That's for me." Carol's eyes narrowed for just a fraction of a second before the smile reassembled itself. I opened the front door and Daniel Frost stepped inside, black wool jacket over a pressed shirt, leather briefcase in hand. "This is Daniel Frost," I said. "Grandpa Walter's attorney." The table went still. Megan set her wine glass down. Gary studied his plate. Aunt Pam folded her hands in her lap. Carol recovered first. She always did. "How lovely," she said, her voice effortlessly bright. "Please sit down. We have plenty." Frost sat. Carol served him soup. And then, while everyone ate and the small talk filled the room like gas before an open flame, Carol made her move. She set her spoon down, reached across the table, and took my hand. "Judy, your father and I have been talking about Grandpa Walter's estate." She paused for effect, her eyes sweeping the table to confirm she had everyone's attention. "We know Walter left some things behind, and we believe that as a family, the right thing to do is share them. Walter was a family man. He wouldn't have wanted one person to inherit everything while the rest of us were simply left out." She glanced at Frost, then back at me. "It's what he would have wanted." I let her finish. I let the room absorb her version of events. Then I reached into my bag. I set the stack of letters on the table beside my soup bowl. 16 envelopes, yellowed at the edges, each one dated in Walter's blocky handwriting. "These are letters Grandpa Walter wrote me," I said. "One every year for 16 years. The table was silent. Carol's hand was still extended toward mine, suspended in mid-reach. "He mailed the first 3. Mom, you returned them." I wasn't looking at Carol when I said it. I was looking at Aunt Pam, at Tyler and Bridget, at Derek, the witnesses. After that, he stopped mailing them. But he kept writing. I opened the 2013 letter and read 2 sentences aloud. The ones about the Thanksgiving table, about Megan sitting at the head and me eating with the younger cousins at the far end. About Walter setting his fork down and asking the question that cost him his family. "Why does Judy eat with the children?" Pam pressed her hand to her mouth. Bridget looked at her phone, then placed it face down on the table. Carol opened her mouth, but I kept going. I placed the tuition records on the table. Grandpa paid for 2 years of my nursing school through a private trust. I didn't know until last week. Then I placed the returned mail log beside it. 47 letters and gifts sent over 16 years. All returned by you, Mom. In your handwriting. And then I placed the chart note, Dr. Okafor's small, precise handwriting on Geisinger Medical Center letterhead. This is from the night of my car crash. The charge nurse called you at 6 a.m. to tell you your daughter was in emergency surgery. I read it aloud, steady the way I'd read a lab result to a parent in the PICU. Factual. Calm. No inflection. Family notified. 0605. Mother stated, we will come if she dies. Declined to attend. Patient stable post-op. The room didn't gasp. It didn't erupt. It simply went very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over 12 people all holding their breath simultaneously, and no one willing to be the first to exhale. Carol broke first. Her chair scraped back and she rose to her feet, both hands flat on the table. The cream sweater and the pearl earrings and the Pinterest centerpiece suddenly looked like a costume that no longer fit. You're twisting everything, she said. Her voice climbed. Walter was unstable. He was controlling. He tried to turn this family against me, and I did what any mother would do. I protected my children. From what? Aunt Pam said quietly from the other end of the table. Carol's head snapped toward her. From a man who couldn't mind his own business. He asked why Judy ate with the children, Carol. That's all he did. He humiliated me in front of my own family. Carol's composure slipped, and what lay underneath wasn't grief or fear. It was fury. 16 years of carefully maintained narrative crumbling in front of the very people she'd spent 16 years persuading. She turned to me. You've always been like this. Dramatic. Difficult. You think because he left you money, that makes you special? He poisoned you against us, Judy. He was a bitter old man who couldn't let go. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. I remained in my chair with my hands folded, my ribs aching, and my voice as level as a flat line. Frost, I said. Frost opened his briefcase. The trust is irrevocable, he said. Judith is the sole named beneficiary. Walter excluded all other family members by name, with a no contest clause. Any attempt to challenge the trust results in automatic forfeiture of all residual claims. The documents have been filed with the Lackawanna County Sygots Court. Carol stared at Frost, then at me, then back at Frost. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. You planned this, she whispered. No, I said. Grandpa did. I stood up, not quickly, not angrily. The way you stand at the end of a long shift when you've done everything you possibly could. You said you'd come if I died. I lived. We're done. Nobody moved for approximately 5 seconds. Then Aunt Pam pushed her chair back and walked around the table to stand beside me. She didn't say a word. She simply stood there, a witness choosing a side, the way witnesses do when the evidence is unambiguous. Tyler followed. Then Bridget. Megan remained seated, her wine glass untouched, staring at the stack of letters as though they were a mathematical equation she couldn't resolve. Derek studied the tablecloth. Carol's performance shifted. The fury dissolved into tears, not the quiet kind. The loud, shoulders heaving, gasping kind that fills a room and commands everyone to stop what they're doing and tend to the person weeping. The kind designed to redirect the entire narrative back to itself. How could you do this to me? She said, pressing the linen napkin to her face. I gave you everything. I raised you. And this is how you repay me, in front of everyone. I had witnessed this before. In the PICU, when a parent who had been neglecting a child for months suddenly dissolved into sobs the moment social services appeared. The tears were genuine. The pain was genuine. But it wasn't grief for the child. It was grief for the version of the story that could no longer hold together. My father hadn't moved. He sat at the head of the table, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the letters. His lips were pressed tight. His chin trembled. Just once, a single involuntary quiver. And I understood what he was thinking about. His father. 23 years of phone calls he could have made and hadn't. A funeral he attended and a granddaughter he never thought to notify. He didn't apologize. He didn't rise from his chair. He didn't say a single word. That silence was its own kind of answer. Megan finally spoke. So, there's nothing we can do. Legally. Frost shook his head. The trust is final. Megan picked up her wine and drank. I gathered the letters and returned them to the cedar box. 16 years of a conversation I never knew I was part of, written by a man I never knew was listening. The box felt different now, lighter somehow. The way a suitcase feels lighter on the journey home because you've left the heaviest thing behind. I picked up my phone from the table. No new messages. No missed calls. For 2 weeks, that blank screen had been an indictment, proof that no one cared enough to dial. Now it was something else entirely. I turned it face down on the table for a moment, letting Carol see it, letting the room absorb it. Then I picked it up and slipped it into my pocket. The silence was mine now. Aunt Pam, I said. Thank you. She squeezed my arm. Frost, I'll call you Monday about the fund. He nodded. I looked at my mother one final time. She was sitting in her chair, napkin twisted between both hands, mascara tracing lines down her cheeks, surrounded by the table she had spent 16 years constructing. The china, the linen, the centerpiece, the narrative, all of it perfectly intact, except the one thing that mattered. The truth about who she actually was. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. I walked out through the front door and into the November dark. The cold air met my face and my ribs ached one last time. A sharp, clean ache, like a final stitch being drawn closed. Like something that had been open for a very long time finally sealing shut. And then the ache softened. The way it does when healing has genuinely begun and your body understands it before your mind catches up. 6 weeks later, I sat in Frost's office and signed the papers establishing the Walter Brewster Fund. The trust had been substantial, not a fortune, but a machinist's lifetime of disciplined saving and thoughtful investing. Enough to endow an annual scholarship for first-generation nursing students at 3 Pennsylvania universities, with a preference for applicants who, in the language Frost and I drafted together, demonstrate resilience in the absence of family support. Frost framed Walter's graduation photograph and hung it in his office. I kept the cedar box on my nightstand. Some mornings I opened it and read one of the letters. Not all of them, just one. The way you'd return to a conversation with someone you love. The first scholarship was awarded in March, to a 20-year-old woman from Allentown who had been in foster care since the age of 12. She didn't know who had funded the grant. She wrote a thank you letter to the committee, and I read it in Frost's office and thought about the letter I had written 10 years earlier to a scholarship committee that was really just my grandfather, sitting alone at his kitchen table, reading my words and placing them carefully in a folder. My mother called once, 3 weeks after the dinner. I didn't answer. My father never called. Megan sent a text that said we should talk, and I replied, I don't think we should. Aunt Pam and I had dinner every other week. She told me stories about Walter I had never heard. How he'd built the cedar box in his workshop over the course of a full year, sanding the dovetail joints until they were seamless. How he told Pam once, quietly, the box is for Judy. When the time comes. My ribs healed. The scars faded to thin white lines along my left side. By February, I could take a complete breath without flinching, a deep, clean inhale that filled my lungs entirely. And every time I did, I thought about Walter's last letter and the line that now lived like a steady pulse beneath everything I did. You were never alone, kiddo. Neither were they now. I used to believe that family meant the people who share your last name, your dinner table, and your blood. I was wrong. Family is the person standing in the last row of your graduation in a black wool jacket, watching, saying nothing, and making certain you will never fall without someone there to catch you. That's my story. One crash. One sentence I will never unhear. And one quiet man who never once stopped showing up. If this reminded you of someone who loved you from a distance, or if it reminded you to be that person for somebody else, tell them today. Don't wait for a cedar box to explain what you meant. And if someone you know needs to hear this, share it with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.